Okay, folks. Thanks for coming in and joining us on the seminar today. It's my pleasure to introduce James Bach here. James is a consultant, author, and a student of critical thinking. He's going to introduce himself and tell you all the exciting things about his decades of experience working in the industry. One thing is we're going to be monitoring the chat. And so if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat window, and we can find the appropriate time to ask those of James. Or if you want to follow up afterwards, that would be great. And the talk is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards and posted for people to be able to review for that. So with that, James, I'm going to turn it to you and let you kick off and have some fun.
All right. Okay. So thank you for inviting me here. It was originally going to be me and my brother. My brother works at eBay in Seattle, but at the last minute, he had some meeting he couldn't get out of. So I decided I'm going to do it all myself and take all the glory for myself. Here's who I am. I'm pretty smart, and I got to be smart because there's a show on Netflix called Dark, and there's a time travel scientist on that show. He's got glasses that are exactly the same model of my glasses. That means that a costume designer said, "What kind of glasses do geniuses wear?" And I spontaneously gravitated to those glasses. And it's not proof that I know what I'm doing, but it's pretty good. It's something. So this is the last diploma that I ever got. This is my certificate of graduation from the 8th grade in Alberg, Vermont. After that, I spent a couple of years in high school and eventually dropped out of there after a fraught existence. And later on became a joined Apple computer, then became a tester, then became a expert witness. I was famously an expert witness on a huge case, the antitrust case against Microsoft, which led to me being declared as this witness. And the very next day, this was the headline in the Wall Street Journal: "Witness is dropped after strenuous protests by the defense." Microsoft complained bitterly to the judge. They said that my work was, I had done so much work that it was not fair to ask the little company like Microsoft to examine the work that I had done. So I felt perversely proud of that. But here's the secret truth behind this little statement. He said that the state's lawyers had delivered 67 CD-ROMs in response to requests for information about Mr. Bach. The 67 CD-ROMs they referred to were all from my recycle bin in my lab that I never intended anyone to turn over to Microsoft, but they just did anyway without asking me. So this was just a complete weird thing that happened. Anyway, that was fun. That happened back in 2002, and I felt like I flew too close to the sun and the wax melted on my wings. But I actually did prove that you can remove Internet Explorer from Microsoft Windows, which Bill Gates had said was impossible. And I proved that he lied about that on the stand, and I had direct evidence that I was able to show the judge, which was why I almost was allowed to testify in that case. So I have a little bit of infamy in the world of technical life as a consultant and as an author. Although I don't have a college degree, a court in Delaware declared that I was an expert in software testing, and nobody objected. So I'm also kind of weirdly proud of that. Although, full disclosure, right after I was accepted as an expert, this other guy was on the other side of the case, who I thought wasn't an expert at all. I just think the judge was declaring everybody an expert that day. So I don't feel like it really meant much, but it still looks pretty cool when you read the transcript. So I may not have academic credentials, but I have some flashy credentials of some kind. And I've been in the industry for a long time. in Silicon Valley and up here. I have worked with Microsoft before I testified against them, or before I tried to testify against them. And it's based on that I want to help you understand a few things about organizational life that I suspect you don't already know. You might know if you have experience working in a large technical company, but you probably don't if you don't have that experience. Because there's a lot of things that people assume about working in big companies that turn out not to be true. As soon as you join these companies, you discover, oh, it doesn't work the way I always thought it did. So I'm going to assume, and I may be wrong, that you folks are mostly young and mostly inexperienced when it comes to working in a project for a company like eBay, Microsoft, Apple, that kind of thing. All right, so here, I'm going to take you through a few examples and explain some lessons. Now, I personally don't mind being interrupted by people unmuting themselves and talking at any time, but I don't know what the culture is for that, so follow whatever culture. But you certainly won't be upsetting me if you were to do this. And but to allow me to focus, I guess Mike is going to be one of the mics is going to be monitoring the chat and interrupting me as you see fit, right, Mike?
Yeah, James, and yeah, for students, I do think that James probably would like the dynamic of hearing your voices directly. So
I would, but maybe it'll create chaos. I mean, use your judgment. It's totally up to you.
Okay.
I personally like the stimulation, but also the thing is that biases in favor of people who don't mind speaking up in a group, which at least my wife, for instance, is terrified of speaking up in a group, and she wouldn't say anything if she had to interrupt me.
Well, there is
our first date, she did not interrupt me at all. So anyway, so I think either way, either interrupt me or write on the chat and then have Mike interrupt me. It's all the same to me.
But I will say this, we need a lot of interaction because James does really well with lots of interaction. So
I prefer that. It tends to distract from my lack of organization when people do that. All right, so here's my first example. I was the youngest manager in the Apple R&D division in 1987. Okay, I was 20 years old on the day I was hired. The interns were older than me in the division that I was in. I had never done management before. I had never worked in an office building before. I didn't know how conference rooms work. I remember thinking, do I have to ask permission to use a conference room? Or do you have to sign up for it? Do you need to have a training class before you're allowed to use a conference room? I saw these huge copy machines and wondered, am I just allowed to use a copy machine? I found out that anyone could just use a copy machine anytime they wanted. So I started playing with it because I like the buttons. And probably used up a lot of toner that way, but people were just letting me do it. I had never worked on a project with more than a few people on it. I had never worked with women. I had never worked with people of any different ethnicity or national origin than my own. I was very inexperienced in those respects. Apple Computer actually required a computer science degree for the position that I was hired for. And yet I still got the job. Isn't that interesting? Here's lesson one. If you're going for a job, ignore the requirements that they give you. Just ignore them, because anyone with enough power in that company has the power to just suspend the requirements and hire you anyway. So never take those too seriously. I mean, pay attention to them. You can make a note of the fact that, okay, I understand I don't have this requirement, but I have these other things, and maybe that will compensate, and give them a chance to decide that they like you. I remember that we hired someone into the development systems group at Apple Computer who had no programming training or background. Her degree was in mathematics. So she sort of sweet talked her way onto the test team, taught herself programming, and then sweet talked the development organization into hiring her as a developer. And she was so wonderful to work with that she had an easy time sliding into that position and starting her career as a programmer, which just goes to show if you have high emotional intelligence, if you're easy to talk to, I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do that people will allow you to do. And also the opposite is true. You might be a misanthrope, but you might be so fantastic in some technical aspect that people say, I want to hire you anyway. I'm going to put up with your little quirks. And that way my company is going to get the benefit of this interesting technical knowledge that you have. I tend to be the kind of person who is not so charming, so I have to be really good technically to compensate for that. So what that I was hired? What does that mean for you? Okay, this is what it means. To get hired, you need to be a fit. And what fit means is different from group to group and company to company. And a lot of what fit means is politically incorrect, even illegal. So people aren't going to tell you what it means. They're not allowed to say what fit is. They're not allowed to say what they truly are making their decisions based on. But I saw in my career at Apple and later at Borland International, when I was a manager for 9 years in Silicon Valley. And during that time, I hired a bunch of people and I participated in a lot of hiring. And that experience gave me a really big lesson, which is I never take it personally when I don't get a job, because I've seen so many stupid reasons that people don't get hired that have nothing to do with their competence, nothing to do with their heart, nothing to do with their ability in any way, or their knowledge or their experience or what they could do or how they could grow. I saw a guy, he didn't get a job once. What someone else on the interview team told me, like, oh, he's got too much nose hair. Now I later on realized, oh, that's probably just racism, and he just doesn't like people from a certain part of the world and doesn't like older people, and that's just kind of the way you say it. If you what you really want to do is just hire someone really young. So I've seen lots of weird things like that you can't really stop people from doing, because you can always make up a plausible sounding reason for not hiring someone. Oh, they're just not quite experienced enough, or this other person is more experienced, and so we have to go with this other person. So I never take it personally anymore. Instead, I treat it like dating, which I don't date anymore. But back when I did, many years ago, my attitude was, I want to fail very fast. I want to minimize the amount of time and energy I'm spending with someone that I'm not destined to be with. So I'm going to just be myself in even an exaggerated way, so that if that's something they like, great. And if that's something she doesn't like, good. Let it be one date and done. So my first date with the person I am now married to, who I've been married to for almost 30 years now, I just talked. I talked and talked. I talked for a couple of hours. She hardly said anything. Hardly. I think she said 12 words. And it turned out what was going on in her mind is she was quite happy that I didn't make her talk. She didn't want to have the stress of having to say things to me. And so she felt comforted by the walls of words this dome of words that I put over our dinner table. I had no way of knowing that was actually making her feel good, but it turned out it was a fit. We had 2 dates and then we got married. just boom, boom. I knew her I married her exactly 6 weeks after she first introduced herself on email to me. 6 weeks later, we got married. We would have been married sooner than that, but we wanted to make sure my mother and her mother could be at the wedding. And then we'd been married 30 years. And it turns out we both make decisions very quickly. Now, she really had no way of knowing whether I was the right person for her. She just kind of felt that I was the right person for her. There seemed to be a fit there. The energies seemed to mesh, and turns out apparently she's a pretty good judge of those things. And whether I'm a good judge of it or not, apparently I'm willing to live with whatever the result is. So the idea of fit is very important, because if you are going to make a difference and make a change in a company, you need to think about how you fit into that company first. You need to think about the whole thing, not as a system of rules where rules are documented and you're going to explain to them how they should change the rules to make their world better. No company operates based on rules. Lots of companies pretend to operate based on rules, but companies operate based on relationships, on trust relationships, prestige relationships. That's how people really operate. So you need to join that system. You need to be a fit. What I'm saying is you may be tempted, and I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, to try to put on an act to make someone want to hire you. And now that's good, because you need work and you need money and you got to support your family. Okay, that makes sense. But a problem is that if you put on an act to get hired and now they're expecting something from you that's not really you don't really want that job, you didn't really want to do that kind of work, but you said, yeah, I would love this, I'm a self-starter, and it's not really true. Well, now you have to live up to that, and you'll find that it's very hard for you to do that. You'll be playing a game you don't want to play, and your energy and your heart won't be in it. And you'll always have stress about that. So even if that happens, what you should be doing is trying to change your position, modify, adapt your situation to make it more of a fit for who you are. And do that as soon as you can and as much as you can. So why was I hired at 20 years old to be manager at Apple Computer? Because they couldn't find someone who knew Apple II assembly language, 6502 assembly language, and I was a 6502 assembly language video game programmer. They couldn't find someone who had that knowledge who also wanted to be a tester. All the people who had that knowledge wanted to be developers at Apple Computer, and they were turning up their noses at this relatively low-paying job, but I was willing to be paid very little money. I was willing to work on a contracting basis. I was willing to do this kind of work, and the manager, he wanted a young guy who he could kind of mold, so I was his project. That's fine with me. I'll be his project. I'll let him try to mold me. He actually later became a psychotherapist. He quit Apple and went back to school, and he became, he now counsels prisoners in the California prisoner system. So no wonder he hired me. Makes perfect sense now. In fact, I might have driven him to it, come to think of it.
Hey, James, this is Mike, and I think this might be a good point to maybe ask some questions or get some questions from faculty or students.
Go ahead.
But I got one just off the bat. How, when people think Apple and they think that you didn't have the college degree and you had some skills, how did you actually get, what was your process in getting hired? Did you do an audition?
Here's the process. I sent my resume to a contracting agency in Silicon Valley, and then I forgot all about it. Then there was a recruiter there who was kind of a hippie. She was kind of a counterculture type of woman. You might say, definitely had a different way of seeing the world. And she looked at my background and said, "Here's an interesting kid." And she said, "Hey, I know a guy at Apple Computer that wants to hire interesting kids. So maybe there's a match here." So she just ignored the requirements, and she went right. The way that she did recruiting was matchmaking.
Nice.
So you got to find, in other words, I didn't go through official channels, you might say. I lucked into a social channel, and social channels are immensely powerful ways to get work.
Okay. Well, why don't we see if we have any questions? And so people, you should be able to unmute yourselves. I don't have to do that. So if you want to ask a question, just
go ahead.
and ask me directly.
I'll jump in, James. This is the other mic. You get a couple of us today.
Yeah.
I like how you're stating you had an unusual and relevant knowledge of Apple II assembly. That's a very niche thing, right?
Yeah.
And probably not that many people had that. But you're also saying it was your social knowledge that got you actually in there. And you referred to the EQ aspect of being able to fit within a team. So as we're talking with students moving forward, how do you balance being very niche and narrow in knowledge versus broad in abilities? And how do you think about that from an ability and hiring perspective?
Well, I think ultimately you've got to look within yourself and be guided by your intuition, by your own internal energy. Because I believe if you act against your internal motivation, your internal sense of right and wrong, and what you want to do and what you don't want to do, if you act against that for any length of time, you will suffer burnout. And all through my 20s, I did act against that, and I did suffer burnout. That's why I had to stop being a professional programmer. Every time I was doing video game programming, I burned out within about 8 months. What I didn't know at the time is there was a vitamin I wasn't getting. I needed human interaction. I wasn't getting human interaction. I was working in a very solitary capacity. And it got so bad that I remember one day I sat down to write some code, and I felt so nauseated at the sight of my keyboard, I was going to throw up. I couldn't sit down at the keyboard because I would be physically sick. That is burnout. When you have physical symptoms, weird physical psychosomatic symptoms, and that comes from ignoring what you know that you need. And I didn't know, I knew internally what I needed, but I didn't have it, I didn't consciously understand it. It took a teacher to help me see that. When I was about 28, I met a fella named Jerry Weinberg, who's written a lot of books. And I took his training, and he's the one that woke me up to how to pace myself, how to say no to opportunities when I know that I'm not able to service that opportunity. So this is something that you learn, and the time to learn it is in your 20s. In your 20, I believe, I'm at 54 now. Looking back, I would say the 20s are the time of beta testing who you are, of stress testing who you are, of trying to do all kinds of crazy things. It's the time to indulge unrealistic expectations and fantasies that you have about life. Just go try it out, see what happens. Because in your 30s is the time to actually perform. This is when you really need to be stable and show up and deliver. I feel that 40s are for leadership and 50s are for teaching. That's kind of how I've organized my life. And now I'm much more excited about helping other people do things than doing things myself. I find that my own ambitions are evaporating away, and I'm much more interested in my son's ambitions and my students' ambitions than I am in my own. It's almost like every person I help is like a little television show that I'm wondering what will happen next season. Will they get together? It's so exciting to watch other people get more powerful instead of worrying about my own power. But in my 20s, I was just totally self-absorbed, trying to work on my own career. I would say yes to every adventure and not realize the things I should say no to. But then I suffered the consequences, had my breakdowns, realized how to regulate myself. I also developed a phobia of email. How about that? I couldn't read email for 6 months. That's one of the weird side effects of burnout that you too might experience if you don't listen to your heart. If you don't listen to that little voice in your head that's telling you to slow down, that's telling you to focus on this and don't try to do that. And you go, but I'll get more money if I do that. And you just say, I can't listen to that. I have to grab the brass ring. Well, you'll make yourself sick.
I appreciate the burnout comments. I mean, many of us we're having Zoom burnout, we're having school burnout, we're having burnout in lives in general. Yeah. What got you through your burnout? Did you have a particular mentor or a realization that?
Right. I'll tell you the number one thing that protects me against burnout is being assertive, the willingness to say no to things that I have an intuition are not healthy for me to do. And now I have the knowledge about the kinds of things that are probably not healthy for me to do. But the number two thing, which is relevant to all of you, is the support of friends cannot be overstated. It is so important. Whenever I am overwhelmed, whenever I'm tired, whenever I'm stuck, I have writer's block and I have to write something or do a presentation or something, I have several different groups of friends that I go to that get me unblocked. In fact, today at noon, from noon to 2 o'clock, I met with a group of testing consultants that I meet with every Friday. We call ourselves the band, and we have a Zoom meeting every week. And we just started this a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago, and then we just haven't stopped. Every week we do it. And the reason why we kept going is it's so nice to be able to show off our work to each other. So today I showed them this presentation so that I could run through it and get their advice about it. So I have this support network that gives me energy. You see, I don't really need ideas from them, although they give me ideas. What I really need from them is energy, but they're not giving me energy literally. They're not transferring electrical power to me or calorie power. What they're doing is the process of talking and listening is causing wheels to turn and processes to happen in my mind that loosen up all my thoughts and start getting these thoughts to be like fluffy popcorn popping all through my head. And I kind of feel like when I don't have people like that to talk to, everything gets like cold. Try to pop popcorn when it's not hot in your head. It just sits there in the pan. It doesn't do anything. I feel cold. I feel inert. I feel like I'm going slower and slower and slower, like a sloth. But then I get together with a student and I try to explain my work to a student. And by the end of that meeting, I'm all hopping and hot and I've got new ideas, even if they didn't give me an idea. That's what I mean by energy, is the process of social interaction releases energy. Now, the same thing goes for my brother. My brother is prone to anxiety and depression. He called me the other day. He sounded so low. So I talked with him for an hour, just got him talking about what he's doing. And then by the end of that conversation, his voice is brighter. He's got more energy. Just the fact of talking to me got him unstuck. So, with all of this COVID stuff, I'm talking to my brother more often these days to keep him positive, to keep him up. And I do this, all my friends do this for each other. So a big thing you can do about burnout is to develop around yourself a coterie, a gang, a support structure, which is, it's not about necessarily doing things for each other, but it's just having people that if you talk to them about your project or about your thinking at that moment, they're interested and they'll listen and they'll respond. And that alone creates a really positive dynamic. So, hey, let me move on to this next slide. So I just want to close out on this idea that you don't need to be a fit everywhere. You need to be a fit somewhere. You don't need to get every job. You need to get the right job. And one of the problems that people have is they think that they need to make themselves into people who are totally interchangeable with what everyone else is. Oh, I have to have all these buzzwords on my resume or else people won't hire me. You know, I tried to help my brother at eBay hire a tester a few years ago. We looked at 75 resumes. As far as I could tell, they were nearly identical. Those people thought they were doing the right thing by adopting a certain template and putting all the same buzzwords. But what they didn't realize they were doing is they were entering into competition, each of these 75 people, with 74 other people who all looked identical to them. What we were hoping for is that at least one of these 75 people would show some spark of uniqueness, of individuality, of humanity, would tell us about something they'd written that we could go and find online, something they'd done that was a little off the beaten path. But you can't just do this in a formulaic way. I remember being in the Apple college hire program. I was trying to find a guy out of school to hire into my team. I ended up hiring a guy who became a vice president at what now is known as Netflix. But it was his first job when he joined Apple on my team. But before I hired him, I interviewed another guy who had been to Harvard. And I thought, ooh, that's exciting. Harvard. Boy, I would love to hire one of those Harvard guys. Since I'm a high school dropout, I feel so good having a Harvard guy and I could brag about that. That'd be great. So I interviewed this guy and he had this thing on his resume. He said, I'm interested in the application of computer science techniques to the analysis of literature. So I asked him about that. And he had no ideas. He had nothing to say about it at all. Apparently, he just put it on there because some recruiter told him it's good to put that stuff on his resume, but he wasn't prepared for anyone to ask him about it. Not only did I not hire him, I went around to all my fellow managers and say, this guy's a fraud. Don't even talk to him. So look, don't do that. Everything on your resume, it should be something you're excited about. It should be something you want to talk about. It should be something that you put thought into and you want to share those thoughts with other people. You take that attitude and you will be competing better. So here's the basic notion I'm trying to get across, which is you might be a very unique kind of snowflake. And you might say, oh, but who will hire me? Maybe there's not a lot of jobs for snowflakes, but there might actually be more jobs for snowflakes relative to the few snowflakes that there are of your particular type, compared with all the thousands of interchangeable workers who are competing for, yes, more jobs, but there still are fewer jobs relative to the total number of interchangeable workers out there. So on the one hand, I know it's tempting to say there's 10,000 jobs for very conventional people. There's only 50 jobs for weird people. So I should be very conventional, right? Well, except there's 100,000, there's 1 million people trying to get those 10,000 jobs. So it may be very, very competitive, much more competitive than you think, if you try to remake yourself into someone who is just purely generic. So if I were you, I would be leaning into whatever weirdness that I can find out about myself. That's why I introduce myself as a high school dropout. because I want to be instantly dismissed by people who believe that high school dropouts are worthless. Good. Don't talk to me. I don't want to waste my time with you. I'm not going to talk you into anything. Just ignore me and move on. I want to talk to the people who are intrigued by that. I want to talk to people who are interested in, well, how did you do it? Or how can you answer my argument about education? Where do you get your education? Well, I'm glad you asked. I have a lot to say about this subject. Let me show you my learning plan. Let me show you my personal syllabus. Let me tell you stories about that. Okay, that's the kind of person I want to talk to. I want to talk to people who are skeptical about me, but they will listen. That's my ideal client. Skeptical people, I have a chance with. People who don't care, I don't want to have a chance with them. And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of those people out there. All right.
James,
Yes.
I have a question. So
Okay.
it sounds like you're very like honest with yourself and you really know who you are. I was just wondering what experiences or revelations or where along the timeline you learned to just be completely honest with other people. Because it does sound like it's a really good thing to
well,
have,
that happened when I was 12 and I was stealing. I was doing a lot of shoplifting, and my mother almost caught me. And I think she probably did catch me and pretended that she wasn't sure. And that was a really good move if she did, because I spent a day being completely sick to my stomach that I was about to be caught. And then she just moved on and I never heard about it again. But I remember making a vow to myself, I'm never going to tell a lie again. I can't live with lies. It makes me so sick with worry. How about I have a new policy, which is never lie. And then I won't have to remember what I said to this person or that person. It'll be a lower stress existence. So that was a key event when I was 12 or 13 that was formative for me. Another thing is that I've had a series of teachers, and early on they were my managers who were mentoring me, like Chris Brown, who was my first manager at Apple Computer. And he was a role model for me about being truthful, about being forthright. And I remember one day I almost caused a strike at Apple Computer. Which is funny now, but at the time that it happened, I almost fainted from embarrassment when I discovered that I had almost triggered the worldwide shutdown of all Macintosh production in 1989 at Apple Computer. And I did that because I took a tour of a factory in Fremont, California. And I decided it was really funny what I was seeing. So I made a whole lot of jokes about all the people on the assembly line while I was on the tour. And of course, all the people on the assembly line were hearing all my jokes about them. And I was cracking up the guy next to me. But apparently I was deeply offensive to the people on the assembly line, to the point where there were angry groups of people in my wake going to management, threatening to stop all production unless I was found and punished. So the next day, there were posters up all over Apple's corporate campus about the guy who was telling the offensive jokes. They don't know who it is, but they need to find out who it is. So I had these wanted posters all around the Banley campus. And they even accurately quoted some of my jokes. I'm like, I've never been accurately quoted. Man, someone was just writing down what I was saying. That's amazing. I almost couldn't stand up. But fortunately for me, the previous week I had taken a class on business writing, and one of the homework assignments was how to write an apology. So I decided I might as well use what I learned last week that Apple sent me to learn. So I decided that my manager had told me that it's okay to make a mistake as long as you admit it and learn from it. So I thought, I guess it's time to test that theory. And I went to my desk and I wrote the most abject apology, no excuses, no nothing like, hey, lighten up, people. It was only jokes. No, I didn't say anything. I just said, oh, how stupid of me. I had no idea that what I was saying was offensive, but I should have had an idea. I should have understood that this is a different culture. I'm in somebody else's house. I to speak that way was terrible. I apologize from the bottom of my heart. I respect what you do. I'm so excited to work at a company that has wonderful people who are doing such advanced things with manufacturing as you're doing there at the Fremont. That's the kind of stuff that I wrote. And I sent it to everybody. I copied everybody, my boss's boss, everyone in all the different organizations. I just blasted out this apology to everyone. And a month later, I had my performance review. And this didn't even show up on my performance review. And at that point, I felt like, I guess my manager was telling me the truth. I guess he felt like I did learn from this, and that it was a learning experience, and it was a mistake, and it was something that he didn't need to flame me over. And I had eaten my crow, and that kind of event, when you have a manager, a leader who turns out to have really been truthful when he said to you, as long as you learn from your mistakes, then of course you're going to make mistakes. And of course, it's not going to be fatal for you to make, I mean, for most mistakes anyway. I mean, if I'd stabbed someone, I think the outcome probably would have been different. Even if you'd stab someone as a joke, it's usually bad. So, but you know, it was just, when I say offensive jokes, I mean, they weren't like, it wasn't like Chris Rock jokes. I'm talking about, I was making fun of the fact that they wear manacles on the assembly line. And I said, oh, it looks like they're slaves. They're manacled. They have to tie them to the assembly line so they don't run away. Now, these weren't manacles. These are anti-static strips, but they look like they're handcuffed. But you know, here's what I didn't know about the assembly line at Apple Computer. The people who worked on the assembly line, they felt like they were handcuffed to that assembly line. That's why they reacted so strongly. Is I worked in the corporate campus. I can not even show up to work and people barely notice. But they get a 5-minute bathroom break once per hour, or they get their pay docked, you know? That's a huge social difference. So they deeply resented someone like me, some snot-nosed kid coming and making light of their working conditions that they actually did resent. And that's what I mean. So it wasn't like I was making like racial or sexual jokes or something like that, you know? So those are forgivable. And I was forgiven, and it really underscored for me the importance of being open and honest. And I remember on that very day, I was commiserating with my coworkers about this, and they were teasing me about how I am. They were teasing me, and I remember one of them said, "Oh, you feel bad today, James, but this will be like a big joke in a year." And they were right. And I have told this story hundreds of times, probably at various classes. I've told lots of people about this, and most of them have been paying me to tell them this story. So I actually have made a lot of money on that mistake, if you think about it. I kind of wish I had made a lot more mistakes when I was younger, because then I could make even more money out of teaching people through the mistakes that I had made. So let me tell you this, if you have any clue that you will ever someday be a teacher or a consultant, every time you screw up and you're embarrassed by it, write everything down and save it. It is a precious gift of gold that you will be so happy in 20 years that you remembered about. Do not forget it, or you will regret the loss of an important asset in your career. The older you get, the more prestigious you get, the more people are fascinated by the mistakes that you made and the times you got fired, or the times you almost got fired, or the time you accidentally, you know, ran over somebody with your car. There's all kinds of interesting things that that you can benefit from in that way. Let me give you another example of change without power. Now, this is a manager. This is one of the finest test managers I ever worked with, named Tamra Selfridge. And I once saw Tamra stand up in the style of 12 Angry Men, that movie. And she was the only manager to speak against releasing a product that wasn't ready to be released. I pride myself on being bold and argumentative. I wasn't going to stand up and try to stop this release. I thought of it as a speeding train. No one was going to stop this. But Tamra, the soft-spoken mother of three, she stood up, she made this impassioned speech, and she got everybody to change their minds. How did she do that? How did she do that? Well, she did it because she had a reputation. My reputation was for being boisterous and argumentative and contrary. So if I'm boisterous, argumentative, and contrary, people go, oh yeah, that's James. It must be Tuesday. You know, he's like that all the time. But Tamra was calm, dependable, and sensible. So whenever she decided to pound the table and get emotional, people would go, whoa, whoa, this is really important. This matters. And so her reputation and her normal steadiness made the moments that she chose to let go and be emotional. And she burst into tears in front of all of us, but in a way that made us feel like that she just cared about us. She cared about us. She cared about our company. And we should care as strongly as she is caring right now. So it was an example of emotion used. If she used it on purpose, it was a very skillful move. If she did it totally intuitively, then her intuition was very wise, because it was an extremely effective way to get her energy across to us. And we decided to postpone the release of a product that really shouldn't have been released. It wasn't good enough. None of us really felt that it was. But Tamra was the only one who wouldn't bow to the pressure in that particular moment. My point is, reputation matters. And if you build a reputation in a company, you will be able to change things, even though you're not in charge of anything. So every interaction you have, every moment, every event, everything you do is an opportunity to build your reputation, to improve it, or to ruin it, or to leave it unchanged. Most things leave it unchanged, but some things build your reputation and build your reputation. And that's what you want, because reputation turns into power. A good reputation turns into power in your social system. So this lets me talk about a simple 3-word consulting process that I learned from Jerry Weinberg, which goes like this: center, enter, turn. And I would say these are the most valuable 3 words that I have learned in my career. If I could narrow it down to 3 words, and I wouldn't narrow it down to 3 words, but if I were forced to, the 3 words I would choose is center, enter, turn. This is a 3-word process of how to make change happen. It begins by centering yourself. Now, you know what? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, center, James, center? That kind of sounds like new age crystal healing stuff. Let's center the forces within. What does that really mean to a rationalist? Not accusing any of you of being a rationalist, but in fact, I am a rationalist compared to most. So I challenged Jerry and said, what does centering mean? And he had this wonderful way of saying it. He said, centering is making yourself equally distant or equally close to all of your resources and options and choices. So if you're not centered, what you are is you are biased toward doing one thing and you're forgetting about all these other options over here. To be centered is to remind yourself of who you are, what you stand for, what your motives are, what your resources are, who your helpers are, to array around you all your stuff that you can muster. And to do that, you need to be emotionally calm, emotionally powerful. So the other idea of centeredness relates to the analogy of center of gravity. If your center of gravity is outside the footprint of your body, you will fall over. In order to stand up in a stable way, you've got to keep your center of gravity between your feet. So centeredness is important. So center, enter, turn. Enter means to enter somebody else's system. You can't change someone's system from the outside unless you use overwhelming force. And if you did use overwhelming force, you would be highly likely to destroy that system or damage that system in some way. And this is something you learn if you're a parent. Some of you might be parents, but as a parent, you have incredible power over your child. But if you actually use your power over your child, you're likely to ruin the relationship you have with your child. So you have the power, but the trick is how not to use your power and still protect your child and get what you want from your child. And that's a difficult trick that many parents struggle with, how to do that. But it's the same thing when you're a worker in a system. Even if you were king of that system, if you just said, okay, now everyone works for me, I order you to do this, you are going to get the worst kind of compliance, the worst kind of behavior if that's your attitude. If instead you say, I have the power to do this and I choose not to use it because I respect you too much, that's an indirect way of actually getting a lot of stuff done by working with other people and through other people. And they are happy if they know that you have power, that you've decided not to use it. And they will reward you with loyalty and with favors of various kinds. So this is what a lot of parents learn. It's what a lot of managers learn if they have an ounce of wisdom and decency about them. So this is my little expansion of center, enter, turn. Pick a problem you care about. Don't even try to solve a problem you don't care about because your heart won't be in it. Your resources won't be there. Make sure you clarify your motives. My first manager at Apple was always telling me, what are your motives, James? Why is it that you think we should do this? And sometimes when I questioned my motives, I found that my motives were merely selfish. And I learned that if my motives are merely selfish, that's not a good enough reason to ask people to do anything. So I found it was a really good move to spend a moment, clarify why it is that I think I should change this system. Do I just want to make my mark on the system? Is that all I'm about? Is it just about ego? Or am I trying to serve them? Am I trying to help these people be happier? And I think I can help them be happier if they'll let me. So I clarify my motives. I psych myself up. This is an important thing too. I think there's a lot of people that don't try to make change in organization because they're waiting for permission. What I do is I just say, I assume when my company hired me, I assume it's because they want me to take action. Why would they hire me and not want me to take action? So unless I am specifically told otherwise, I just assume that my CEO is behind me. I may not have ever met the CEO, but I assume he's completely 100% behind me in what I'm doing right now. I am going to assume that until proven wrong. And I've always taken that attitude. I used to say when I worked at Apple, you know how people often sign their emails like, my opinion does not necessarily represent that of my company. I had a signature that said, my opinion represents that of my company. I was very pointed about that. Like, whatever I say, I'm sure it's what all my managers believe. And if it isn't, then they should probably change what they believe or fire me. But I'm going to believe what I believe regardless. So I put that on my email signature when I used to work at Apple and later at Borland. By the way, I never got into trouble for doing that. I don't know. Maybe no one was paying attention to what I was saying on my in my email signatures. A really important thing is to always have a service mentality. And amongst the things that I learned in my 20s that I began applying in my 30s is how to feel I'm serving people without feeling small and weak. And that's a lesson everybody has to learn. And it's probably a different lesson for different people. As a young man, it was particularly challenging for me to learn this lesson because I wanted to be top dog. I don't want to be anybody's doormat. I would look at any other man and say, oh, that guy's in charge. Why am I not in charge? Napoleon conquered Europe. Why can't I conquer Europe? Genghis Khan, he's a man like me. Can't I conquer Asia too? Why does Julius Caesar get to be emperor of Rome and I don't? I have all these throughout history, all kinds of men of my age who looked like me, completely dominated the world. There's a little part of at least this man's mind that's thinking, why not me? What's wrong with me? When do I get my turn? So it's a little hard for especially men sometimes to go and serve people and say, I am a servant. I am going to help other people instead of dominate them, instead of be served by them, because you kind of feel like, oh, I'm a lower form of life. I had to learn in my 20s how to overcome that feeling. For me, becoming a father was a big part of overcoming that. Something about the father hormones or something, whatever the chemicals, the oxytocin or whatever it is that gets into your head when you become a parent, and you just feel like, I'll do anything for this child. This child can have me up all night and I somehow don't mind. He can throw up all over me and I somehow don't mind. He can demand and I somehow don't mind. Whatever the chemicals are that did that also kind of got me to think about other people and think, I'm happy to be of service to other people too. So that was one thing. And the other thing was all the management training that I went through at Apple Computer was really helpful to help me feel that I can have a lot of power, even if I wasn't dictating to people what it is that they had to do. So after I was a manager for 9 years, I decided I didn't want to be a manager anymore because I felt powerful even when I wasn't in charge. I felt like people listened to me. Today, I am a technical fellow at a company called Tricentis. Nobody works for me, but everybody listens to me. They have to listen to me because I work for the chief product officer and he supports me and the board supports him and the CEO supports him. So I have this major sponsor, this major power base, and I know how to use my words and my tone of voice and my assertiveness. And I'm working with a bunch of other guys who are also quite senior and quite experienced. So they're used to this kind of thing. And I've been working for about 6 months with this group, and no one needs to work for me, but they listen to me because I come prepared. I know what I'm doing. I assert myself. I've got sponsorship. I've ticked all the boxes. So they listen as if they worked for me. And that's wonderful because I don't have any of the responsibilities of management, but I feel like I have all the power that I want that management has. I'm holding it indirectly from the chief product officer. And part of the way that I use that power is I'm constantly honoring, respecting, complimenting, appreciating, giving thanks for the people that I work with. I've learned that that's what I need to do, especially because listen to my voice. Do you hear my voice? I don't know about you, but when I hear my voice, I think, what an unpleasant voice. It's scratchy, it's loud, it's It's nasal. It's not exactly Jeremy Irons. Okay. Not exactly. So I have to use, I don't have the natural attractive charm. I have to use overt expressions of appreciation to emphasize to people that I'm proud to work with them, that I want them to be happy, that I hope I have not offended them in the meeting today. Frequently, I say things like that. I'm worried that I interrupted you a few too many times. I'm sorry. Sometimes I get exuberant, and I hope that that's okay. But you know what? If it isn't, please talk to me about it and let me make amends to you. That's the kind of thing I say to my coworkers. Every once in a while, I say, I'm so glad to be working with you. I'm so glad you're taking care of this issue and you're maintaining those to-do lists and that Kanban board so I don't have to. It really makes it easy for me to focus on what I need to do. So I'm constantly, I never flatter. I only tell the truth, but I work really hard to find truthful things to say that are nice about people. And they know that I'm telling the truth, and they would know if I was lying. They would know if I was just blowing smoke. So, and I mean, my wife taught me this partly. You know, it's important to thank if you're, it's probably true for women, but especially true for men. If you're married, guys, you got to thank your wife on a regular basis for all she does for you, because she probably does a lot for you. But if your wife is like my wife, then she's going to say, what are you thanking me for? Now, so I know I have to have the list ready. I'm always ready with the list. Like, here are the things over just the past 3 days, that you did for me. Boom, 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 boom. I'm always ready with that list off the top of my head. And then she gives me credit for thanking her. Then she will accept my thanks because I'm actually acknowledging what she did. So I try to do that with my coworkers as well. And that way it's kind of like I'm lubricating, I'm cooling down the system. This enables me to say, I really want you guys to support me on this. I really want you guys to do this for me. And even though I don't have any power, they're going to want to do this for me because I've entered their heart. They see me as someone who cares about them and who is helping them, not someone just out to get what I want and screw them. All right, I suppose that's all I have time for in terms of time. In terms of this presentation, but I'm happy to take more questions. I want to make sure that I get, if anyone has any or comments. I mean, you can disagree with me or you can challenge me on something, and I'd be delighted to respond to your challenge.
There is a chat one that you can maybe address. It's on the very bottom from Zach Chandler. Do you see that?
Oh, I have to open the chat window. Let's see. Very bottom, it says, yeah. oh, Zach Chandler right above that. Okay. Yeah, man. Okay. I've had similar experience from the other side. Really makes you feel low and some corporate slug. Oh, corporate slugs. Demeans you. I hear the value of mistakes, but it's not clear if you've developed any empathy from this. Empathy. Well, let me tell you about empathy. There was I told you about the time that I almost caused a strike. So there was another time when I almost fainted at work from embarrassment, and it was when I accidentally replied all to a request for review feedback for a senior director at Borland International. So he was a fellow manager, but he was a higher ranking manager than me. So I accidentally told 120 people in this company what I thought of this guy when I meant to talk just to the vice president. And what I said was true, but it wasn't very nice, I guess. I said that I thought the guy he had very little energy. He wasn't prepared when he came to meetings. He wasn't upholding the standard that we had for managers at Borland International. I really didn't understand why he was still on the job with the way he was behaving. In my opinion, he didn't add any value to these meetings. And I thought the VP should know that, right? I didn't mean to say that to everybody, but I accidentally did. And I realized it 10 seconds after I sent that note. That's when I realized it. And the world swam in front of my eyes. And I tried to stop the delivery of the email, but even though because I used to volunteer for everything in those days, I was the email administrator for our email server. Even with my administrator privileges, I couldn't stop the delivery of this email. And so it was a very bad day for me. And it got worse because the VP came to see me in the afternoon and he told me, he said, I guess you didn't know, but this manager you were talking about, his wife is dying of terminal hepatitis. And that's why he's not very engaged in work these days. So you probably didn't know that. And my first reaction was, yeah, I mean, I had no way of knowing that. It's not my fault I didn't know that. But the very next thought that I had was that it was my fault, that it never occurred to me that there could be a good explanation for his behavior. And that's on me. Now, a little later on, it might even have been that day, I was headed to the hospital because my wife was in the hospital and I was worried about her, and a big test had just been done and I was fretting about it. So I was driving to the hospital and I was speeding and I went right through a construction zone with one of those guys that's holding the sign that says slow, and he had the high vis vest. And I went past him at maybe 60 miles an hour. And he somehow managed to kick my car as I went by. There was this thump. And he was shaking his fist in the rearview mirror. And my first thought was, can't you see I'm going to the hospital? And my next thought is, of course he can't see that I'm going to the hospital. He thinks I'm just a crazy driver who doesn't care. Now, those two events together opened up a kind of empathic pathway for me that is open to this day. And it enabled me under pressure to do certain things that I never could do when I was in my early 20s, which is somebody insults me, somebody does something that I judge them for, and I've got this little voice that says, wait a minute, you don't want to be embarrassed. Maybe there's a really good reason for this behavior and you just don't realize it. So a customs officer snapped at me for not filling out the date on a form. That's it. I didn't put the date on a form. And she's like, can't you read? The date's right there. Why don't you fill out the date properly? And I wanted to say, what's with you, lady? I've just been on a plane for 14 hours. But the actual first thought that I had was, I wonder if she had an argument with her teenage son this morning that didn't go well, and she's hurting inside. I wonder if 38 people had not filled out this form and she was nice to them, but she's just snapped because I'm the 39th. And so I'm getting all of it for all the other 38 people. Maybe that's going on. Maybe her coworkers don't respect her. Maybe she's getting harassed by her coworkers and she's just on edge because of that. You know, these are the things that now are the first thing to pop into my mind most of the time when somebody disses me. Now that's empathy. How did I learn that? I learned that through a few embarrassing episodes of not being empathetic to people and feeling terrible about that later on and never wanting to do that to somebody ever again. And meditating on those things and telling these kinds of stories helps keep that empathic pathway open. And I think it also doesn't hurt that I'm blessed with having a extremely respectful and supportive wife who's constantly giving me the benefit of the doubt. So if in your life, if you feel that people are being friendly to you, being supportive to you, being empathetic toward you, it definitely helps you want to be that way, to kind of pay them back by showing that kind of grace to others, which is not to say that I'm always able to do it. But I'll guarantee you this, anytime I fail to show empathy to someone and someone else points that out to me, I meditate on that. I feel bad about that. And I think, what can I do to make it right? And occasionally I've had to make difficult apologies. Sometimes my apologies were not accepted, but I feel like it's right to make the apologies anyway. So I just go ahead and make them. And I get better at this over time, but it takes years to really develop empathy, and you have to want it and decide that it doesn't make you weak. One of the reasons people don't develop empathy is it's a pathway to vulnerability. It makes you vulnerable. It makes you attackable in a certain way. You can be manipulated in a certain way. And that's why a lot of people don't want to be open to empathize, because they don't want to have their energies pulled out of them. So where they feel like they have to help everybody and they can't protect themselves. So part of being empathetic is also you need to feel that you're strong, that you're strong enough that you have some energy that you can give to other people. But now at this time in my life, I just feel like I'm a father and I'm proud of being a father. And part of being a father is I put a roof over other people's heads. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I protect people. I try to make a life a little easier for other people. And having said that, there are certain people I don't make life easy for. And there's certain enemies that I have but if you look closely, you'll find that almost all of these people, I think all of these people, are powerful people. There are certain powerful people who misbehave, and I don't have a lot of empathy for them, I suppose. Maybe I should.
Is there any more questions?
All right. Well,
thank you, James.
Yeah, let me leave you with this last thought then. I want to leave you with this little phrase. Constructive insubordination is a phrase that I coined. I've heard other people call this positive deviance, but I think constructive insubordination has a better ring to it personally. I think it's a sharper, more tangier thing to say. Constructive insubordination is when you serve people without obeying them. You don't do what they want you to do, but you do what they end up being happy that you did. And I learned as a manager, I love it when people who work for me don't just do what I say, they do what makes me powerful. They do what makes me safe. They do what makes me proud, even if I didn't think of it first. And so I try to keep, as a manager, I used to try to keep examples and stories of people disobeying me and yet making me quite happy about that, so that they could develop judgment about how they could break the rules in a way that I would applaud rather than in a way that I would feel bad about. Because obviously insubordination is a challenging thing, and a lot of people don't want to be insubordinate. So I want you to think about that. And that is part of how you change things without having power, is to break the rules for moral purposes and in a way that uplifts the people around you. There are ways of doing that. And if you work for the right kind of people, they'll actually encourage you to do that. I can only hope you will find a way to work for people who will encourage this sort of behavior, rather than the kind of people who say, I don't pay you to think, I just pay you to do what I say. Because you can always say back to them, actually, no, you don't pay me to obey. I never agreed to that. I agreed to serve, not obey. Those are two different things. All right, that's my parting thought. Thank you for your attendance. I hope this has been helpful. And look, you can always contact me if you want to bend my ear about some of this stuff. I hope each and every one of you gets a wonderful job, or gets a better job if you already have a job. I know it's really tough with COVID out there, but you know what? You can do it. It can be done. Each of you is a unique story, though. You're not just a little sand grain on the beach. Each of you is a unique shape, a unique force. And when you figure out how you are unique, you're halfway to finding where you need to be in the world. And I wish you all the speed in finding your place.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really good.